Thank you, Jeff. Actually, we changed the title. It's Rethinking Copper. How many of you think we can meet the copper demand, the soaring copper demand in the next 5 years? How many think we can do that? I will ask again at the end of the discussion. So first, we'd like to bring the panel. Mark Cutifani, so delighted to have you here today. Chairman of Vale Base Metals and former CEO of Anglo American. He's a trailblazer with nearly 50 years of transformative leadership in the mining industry. He has consistently pushed the boundaries of what's possible, not just improving performance, but also contributing for the industry to be more responsible. What many don't know about Mark is that he was offered a professional soccer contract at 15. His father insisted he become a lawyer, so he chose mining just to annoy him. And instead of becoming the David Beckham, he becomes Mark the Miner. David Strang has been active in the mining industry for 30 years, primarily in the copper mining sector, having founded, managed, and sold a number of copper development and mining companies. David is the co-founder and chairman of Ero Copper Corporation, a copper mining company with 3 mining operating in Brazil. He's a Stanford graduate in earth science. Little known fact is that he was a member of a Stanford track team and represented Great Britain in 1996 Olympic Games in the 800 meters. So, welcome. You may want to sit closer to here. I'll just make a quick introduction. The world is electrifying. You call me that one. From vehicles to power grids, so the demand for copper is set to soar, driven by digitization, energy transition, and replacement of fossil fuels. But we all agree, some said we can meet the demand, but we probably can't meet the demand doing the same as we are doing today. So we can't keep up. So what are we going to do? Increasing the supply is costly, slow, more complex. So we have to rethink how we're going to go about it. We can reduce the copper demand, and you are familiar, aluminum has already replaced the core of transmission cables with the copper clad, just on the surface, in AC transmission. So, but we can perhaps use higher frequency systems to further minimize the use of copper, for example, in long distance transmission. Let's talk about it. We don't know, in short distance is possible, but maybe also in long distance. So can we do more with less? Impact, new technologies? Can we change how we mine? Can we discover differently? Meeting the copper demand pushes us to rethink, to do things differently, and Mark and David are perfectly suited to share us their insights on how we can come up with disruptive pathways to meet the demand. Hello. So first, they're going to start with a couple of minutes to share more about their experience and so on, and then we'll go into a set of questions and we'll take your questions. Mark?
So first, thank you, Doris, and good to be here, David. And it's wonderful to be here, Jeff, so thank you for the invitation, and it's been a wonderful today and looking forward to tomorrow as well. We agreed that we do a little bit of context, and I get to set a little bit of context, and that context is consistent with the idea that if we don't sell our story better to society, then we will continue to struggle to develop the operations that we need and which are critical to providing copper. So I shared a story about 3 or 4 years ago. I got sick of introducing myself to people saying, Mark Cutifani, I work in the mining industry, and people sort of looking at me rather strange, and that was the end of the conversation. So I tried something different when somebody said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, let me sort of give you a sense of it and see if you can guess. And I said, I work for an industry that has the most significantly net positive environmental impact on the face of the planet. Would you like to guess what industry I work for? So far, nobody's guessed. It's mining. And what it has done, though, is it has provided an opportunity to talk about mining for a couple of minutes. And the points I make, very simply, is if you look around you, because people do ask, how do you get that net positive angle in terms of the mining industry? And I explain, if you look around, it doesn't matter what it is, if we've made it, it comes from mining. And, well, wait a minute, look around and, oh yeah, buildings, electronics are obvious, but literally everything, and if it's not mined, it's grown. And of course, I've got the retort for that in actual fact, nature in of itself in growing plants is an in situ leaching process that we've learned from, but it is also part of the mining, one of the mining processes we have available to us. That obviously starts a few different conversations, but then I do make the point that on the net positive environmental impact, without fertilisers, we would need to double the amount of land under crops to feed the planet, or not feed 4 billion people. 2, the products of mining allow us to build up, to build infrastructure and concentrate human populations so that we have a smaller effect on the planet. And between those 2 issues alone, we shrink our human footprint and its impact on the planet by 30%. And we use 0.03% of land to produce the products we produce. If you can tell me one industry that has such a significant impact on the environment, I'd like to hear from you now. And that conversation is always an interesting conversation. And when we went to the Vatican with that story, we were able to convince Pope Francis to just some of the wording of Laudato Si. And for the Archbishop of Canterbury, who came out 5 years ago and said, after we'd been working with the Anglican Church and all of the church faith-based groups, and there's a reason for that, he came out with a press statement that said, we've been researching the Bible for the last 3 years, and we've not been able to find one negative reference to mining. Therefore, we conclude we can support mining as long as it's done responsibly. And as I said to the Archbishop, it's taken us 2,000 years to get that acknowledgement, but it was worth it. So we have to change the debate, we have to change the conversation, because people just don't understand, 1, how the world works and how we contribute to a sustainable world.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. David.
Well, I don't know how to follow up on that, because I've never got an audience with the Pope. In putting this together with Mark, we decided we'd do what Mark was doing, just given the general context. And me being the copper geek, who has been in and around the copper industry almost my entire career, and I don't know why I love this little metal. I would spend some time and just give you a bit of context of why copper is the critical mineral. Everybody is running around right now talking about rare earths. Rare earths aren't really rare. Rare earth metallurgists and processing plants are currently. But what is essential to everybody's life in this room today is that bronze-colored metal, copper. We cannot live today without it. It is integral to everything we do in our daily lives because outside of silver, it is the most efficient transmitter of electricity. And our lives today are run in the modern world by electricity. And so everybody in this room will want me now to start talking about AI and how AI is going to play out and the energy transition and all these types of things. But I'm going to digress a little bit. Doris and Mark know I like to talk about weird analogies like milk, but I won't give you milk today. I'm going to give you a little bit more about two countries in the world that we don't generally talk about right now. But they are going to have a fundamental impact in our lives over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. We have been living with regards to the growth in the world over the last 25 years because of China. But there are two countries currently now, one being India, the second being Indonesia, the largest population in the world, and the fourth largest population in the world, who together account for nearly a quarter of the world's population in two countries. India is the fastest growing economy in the world right now. Do you believe that Indonesia is number 3? We don't even talk about these people. Yet, and I use this analogy, the average Indian and the average Indonesian has to go to 4 different stalls every day in order to go and cook their meal that night. In 1948, one of the greatest inventions was made in the world. Does anybody know what that invention was? It's refrigeration. The fact that we can now refrigerate our food drops disease, allows us to do other things with our time, and allows us to work in the world that we work today. The average Indian and the average Indonesian does not have a refrigerator. And guess what they're doing? They're starting to get the economic buying power to start spending money on these types of things. And so when we look at it right now, in terms of world growth, in terms of copper demand, the general consensus is, over the next 25 years, we need to double our production of copper. Current consumption of copper in the world today is just over 25 million tons a year. If you look at general consensus, we need 50 million tons of copper by 2050. I think that's a little conservative, considering that we start talking about things like Indonesia, India. We now have energy transition, and now all of us in this part of the world and in the Western world all want to use AI. Massively power intensive, we have to start investing more and more in power, and that needs more and more copper. And that is one of the biggest things we have to start paying attention to in terms of this. It is all about copper if we want to continue to grow the world economy the way we want to continue our lives and moving forward in that regard. So that's demand. What about supply? It's kind of crazy. We talk about that on average it takes 15 years from a discovery to bring a new copper mine into production. It's a significant amount of investment. Per ton of copper of new supply, we have to spend currently about $25,000 of capital. In 25 million tons over the next 25 years, that equates to $625 billion of investment that has to be invested in the copper mining industry just to keep up with supply. And, just keep up with demand. That is an incredible number considering that the entire revenue generated per year in the copper industry today is $250 billion. So it is a big, big ask that we have to do. So one of two things are going to happen. Either the metal price is going to go up, which is going to slow the growth, global growth, because we will not be able to put all that power in place, or we have to come up with some technological solutions and new thinking with regards to how we more efficiently bring copper into the world. And that's what we're going to talk about together.
Thank you. So now we know how important copper is. It's probably the number one, as we said, that we need in order to live and for the future. So, Mark, if we had to double the supply of copper without opening new mines, how would we do it? How would you go about it?
So I'll give a few examples of things I said, but I think a lot of the conversation we've had today on new technologies, on exploration, and these guys know it as well as anybody, covers a lot of the really important points. But from a new exploration perspective, maybe there's 10 to 15%, something in that range. But if you look at existing operations, and in the last about 7 years, I've been involved in a review of about 150 operations through Anglo, through work I've done since leaving Anglo, through other work, through Vale Base Metals. And it's my guess at the moment, based on the conversations we had, and David's seen a lot of the same things, we're probably underutilising the assets that have already been developed in our industry by 30 to 50%. And I think that might be conservative. First, understanding endowments. So we talk about reserves, we talk about resources, but understanding that full potential, and that's why I was smiling when Jeff was talking about full potential, is trying to understand what full potential looks like is really important. And this is a public conversation, so I'm not talking out of school. When we reviewed the Salobo operation in Brazil with the team trying to understand the potential, we sat with the team and we did a full asset review to understand how quickly we could expand copper growth and nickel from the operations. In the first hour, we asked about geology and people said, well, this is what we've got and resources are X. Within the first hour, we said, well, how big do you think it could be? And talked about the trends, the structures, what holes they did have, and very few. But by the end of the first hour, there was a view that the resource is probably double what we think it is. And that's just on the structures we know. That's not the whole endowment. We said, okay, second question, if that were to be true, is there anything you'd do differently in the mine today compared to what you're doing based on your current knowledge? And the question really wasn't understood, so we asked it a different way. We said, what's your current bottleneck? And they said, oh, probably tailings placement. So that led us to the question, well, if that were to be true, you're running a very low cut-off grade on the ore body, and you know there's a lot more there, and you're constrained by a fixed volume. Why wouldn't you increase that cut-off grade so that you maximise the volume of copper for that constraint? In the end, it didn't matter whether it was tailings or some other constraint. What we were looking for is, did they have a sense of what the constraint would be if we said there are no constraints, i.e. the resource is much bigger. So I said, yes, but what would you do? And we said, well, what about cut-off grades? What about the way you're developing the deposit? What about getting to that high grade quicker? And a whole range of questions. So at the end of the first day, we'd agreed that production shouldn't be 200,000 tonne. It probably should have been 300,000 tonne. And the value of the asset went from 6 billion to 12 billion. And as we repeated that exercise through the portfolio, we came up with a very similar set of results. And so what it said to us is, as leaders, are we asking the right questions? Do we know what even the right questions are? And do we have the right technologies supporting those questions? So when I talk about endowments and brownfields potential, I think it's better than 50% just in that category alone. And there's a whole range of things you can talk about then, which is processing optimization, making sure that we're using the right reagents for flotation recovery, coarse particle flotation. There's another 20 to 30% in those sort of numbers, and you can go all the way through to scrap, and David's the one that's got a real good understanding of the downstream issues and what can be. But from my point of view, I think that's a starting point for a conversation. Let's get the best out of what we got as a starting point, because we're using our capital very poorly.
Excellent. So we can get a lot more out of what we got, and without spending much money. But it pushes us to think differently. What we got is so unproductive. We'll come back to that. But David, another source of supply is recycling. So can you speak about the bottlenecks in recycling, and also if it's any innovation that's a game changer that we are underinvesting in?
Yeah, recycling in copper is a very interesting issue that we deal with. Over the last 20 years, the copper price has almost tripled in price, yet recycling has still only been between 19 and 22% of global supply. And in theory, if the metal price has gone up, why aren't we seeing more scrap or more recycling occurring in the industry? And it's a real conundrum. We break it down into two areas. We call it elastic and inelastic availability. Elastic is fairly easy. You know, you have your computers, your cars, those types of things. You scrap them. You can smelt them again and then bring them back out. But then there's the inelastic side, which is a very significant portion of copper that is not recycled. And that generally sits in buildings. It sits in the ground. You know, the amount of cabling that sits in the United States that is no longer used, but just sits in the ground and we don't pull it out, we don't recycle it, is astonishing. And the question is why? People have tried, but the incentive price or the technology is still not there. Maybe it's governments aren't keen on people going in and suddenly putting big winders on and pulling cables out the ground, et cetera, but these are types of areas where thinking has to go to if we want recycling to become a greater part of the basic part of our supply. Because we do have this large amount of inelastic material sitting there that nobody's quite figured out how we recycle it.
Thank you. So we talk about we can get a lot more out of what we got, and recycling. Now, what about technologies? Is there any breakthrough technology or an innovation, Mark, to you, that we can look in the processing or any aspect of the value chain that will be a game changer?
So I think there are, again, a number of technologies that will, again, incrementally improve process recoveries. There's tailings, waste deposits that will go and back and reprocess. But I also think if you look at consumption of copper will change, depending on the price and how quickly it goes there. There'll be thrifting. As Elon Musk said, if copper goes to $20,000 a tonne, I'm going to be using less copper in a Tesla. And you'd expect that to occur. So there'll be a point at which the price pushes the thrifting, substitution, there'll be new technologies, and there'll be new physical technologies that will be developed that will power vehicles and other things using different approaches. So it'll be all of the above. In our industry, I think AI and some of the conversations we heard earlier today applied to finding, recovering, or mining and recovering, I think are going to be the key. One thing that 2 points that were raised. One on the Nesbitt team is I absolutely agree with the modelling and understanding. One question I would have, maybe over a beer, is the resource optionality. The one thing we've observed over the years is most miners, geologists and miners, haven't got their head around, and what we see is understanding resource optionality and how they can play tunes on the mining strategy stroke processing strategy to do better. So putting more volume out when the prices are up and less volume out by parking gear, running cut-offs, using stockpiles to actually have a moving cut-off cost over time is the way you optimise your return. So I think we're going to get a lot smarter in terms of the way we see the resource, the way we mine the resource, and the way we sell our product into the market. And Gracelyn asked a question about, Gracelyn was talking about how do we look at pricing through time. And Inco, for those that can remember, was very effective at running floor prices and caps to operate, and through the cycle averaged 10 to 15% above the average LME price for nickel, which ended up contributing 40% of their EBITDA through the cycle, above and beyond the LME price. It has been done before. There are ways you have to think about doing it in these markets, but there are all sorts of innovations, whether it's physical, whether it's geology, whether it's mining technical, whether it's the technologies of extraction or financial considerations in the way you play into the markets. I think they've all got to come into play.
Yeah, so it's really looking at the whole system, and I think ore body knowledge is key, so opportunity for everyone here, and break down all the walls of geology, mining, processing, and really understand the ore body and design a process to extract the value from it, all the way maybe to in situ. I can't do any session without in situ recovery because it's my passion. Okay, so David, high grade, tier 1, is that possible? Is it really, can AI help? And there's another way to increase the supply faster through exploration?
Great question. It is possible. There are certain parts of the world that we haven't looked at. You know, particularly when we look at copper in particular, the big places to look for the remaining big porphyries are southern Colombia, Ecuador, some of the areas where due to war or some other issues we haven't been able to look. Afghanistan has got some very interesting porphyry deposits, Pakistan as well, but they generally have been off limits. So I'll never say that we won't find tier 1. I think certainly Mark's company in Vale Base Metals and the Carajás region of Brazil is an area that has the potential to have very significant discoveries, certainly tier 2, perhaps a couple of tier 1s. From a technology perspective, yeah, I think so. I think some of the stuff that Fleet's doing, some of the stuff that Excalibur is doing in terms of this data that we can look at and work with. And I don't want to give too much away, but Jeff has a wonderful student who's doing some amazing work, and you heard a bit about it earlier today with regards to pattern recognition technology that we're been supporting. That seems quite exciting, and certainly stuff that, you know, Flavia and I will have a chat about at some point about looking at data. So I don't think it's not going to be there, but certainly I think most of it is going to be looking deeper. And how do we look deeper into the ground, and how do we start finding them there?
So explore differently. Because the way we have been doing, perhaps we haven't explored the whole Earth. Maybe different ways of doing it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was having a conversation with somebody just over lunch about that particular issue. I mean, we have relied on an industry where the geologist is king, and their experience in you take a gray-haired geologist over a 25-year-old geologist, only from the standpoint that somehow they know better. With the work that Terra AI are doing and a number of different companies are doing in terms of bringing AI into the sector and trying to remove bias and trying to keep it more data-driven, certainly is going to provide, I think, great opportunities for us to be able to look at better places and different places to look for things than we have historically.
3 minutes. If copper had a voice, what will be screaming at us, Mark?
Over here.
David?
Yeah, I mean, it is. As I said in my introduction, it is a critical metal. You need me. I was thinking about it beforehand, and I was thinking about Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is like Seymour, right? Feed me.
Okay, we have 3 minutes for a question. Who would win in a foot race, Mark or David?
David.
I plead the fifth. I have a replaced hip, and I think it would not be pretty.
So I think, do you have just a word to close? We have.
Look, I'm an eternal optimist. We will find a way, and with the conversations that we've heard today, you've got the right thinking and the right approaches, and I think we have to push the limits. And so continue to ask why, continue to ask how, and we will find the right roadways, and ultimately price will determine where things go. And given we also mine nickel, some other products, the fact that we might get a little bit of spillover and a bit more demand for those products, that's not a bad thing either.
No, not at all. I would say this, and people who saw me here last year said the exact same thing. I graduated in 1991 from this university. I was the last person to do the Bachelor's Science in Mineral Resources at Stanford University. I was the first person in 10 years, and in fact, Andy, put up your hand, Andy was the last person before me who actually did the degree. And in the subsequent 30 years, or 35 years, or what, nearly 40 now, holy cow, there has been limited interest in our sector. And what we're starting to see is conference like this and people re-emerging. We lack intellectual capital in our business, and there's no offense to the people who work really hard in our business, and we work and do that. But universities like Stanford, top universities around the world, have not looked at our sector as somewhere where they want to invest capital and in intellectual capital to help. Jeff has been a lone star holding the hand up and protecting parts of the industry at Stanford. But yet now we have young people here. We've got a great group of PhD students. We've got a great group of postdocs. What we need now is to encourage younger people to get back into this industry. And I think the fact that people are starting to realize how critical these minerals are to the future is going to bring the intellectual capital back. But all of us have a responsibility to encourage people to look at our sector. It is ripe for disruption. I mean, concentration, the art of concentration, which is the basic way that we process, was developed in 1919. We're still using the same methodology to recover copper. I mean, come on. You know, I mean, that's Henry Ford was just making his first car, and we did this. So it's ripe for disruption. There's great opportunity for people in this to come into our industry now and take a hard look at it, and you know, allow Mark and I to gracefully move off into the sunset, or disgracefully.
Wait. Since we're the last ones, we'll have one more question before we close.
Thank you, Mark and David. Super fun conversation. So at Kobold, we make all of our scientists make predictions constantly every day, falsifiable predictions. So I'm going to ask two of you to make two public predictions. First, okay, in the year, let's say 2040, what will be the total global copper production? And what will the head grade of that production be? 2040. You have 10 seconds.
All right, I think we're going to be closer to 50 million tons of production than in 2040. Absolutely. I mean, you've got a tidal wave coming in India. Unlike China, you've got a lot of high educated people earlier in the process in terms of India. And you've got to see what is happening in Indonesia right now. It is incredible. I was in Singapore last November, walking around trying to get investors to buy my company, and all they want to do is buy Indonesian companies. Indonesia is booming. So I would argue 2040, closer to 50 million tons. Interesting on the grade, though. I think the grade will continue to decline. Quantify it? Well, right now, the average grade, so when I started in the industry, the average head grade was about 1.1, 1.2% copper. The average head grade today is 0.6. I think we'll be down to 0.35 to 0.4.
Yeah, 50 million tonnes, I'm good with that. And I'd take the 100-year average, 1.5% per year, comes to be very close to probably a 30% reduction. From where we are now. So we're going to be pretty close on the numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, now to finish.
All right, hold on.
Okay.
What's your prediction, Kurt?
Very fair. I think I'll take the under on production and the over on grade. I would say for 2040, I'll say production at 40 million tons and grade at 0.4%.
Okay, so we're there on grade.
So
Say the grade.
to finish, how many, raise your hands, the ones who believe that we can meet the copper demand in 5 years, doing things differently with all the things we discussed, getting more out of our assets, new technologies, new supply. Wow. So the word to end is disruption. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that concludes day one. See you tomorrow, day two.